Did you ever get picked on the baseball field? Like, what I mean is when it came time for recess or whatever, and you guys are all going out and you're getting ready to play on the schoolyard, and everyone lines up, you get two team captains. Usually the best players are the team captains, and they get to pick who they want on their team. I hated those moments of being picked and always being afraid that you're going to be picked last. Fortunately, I was never one of those kids that got picked last all the time, but I was never picked first. And there's always this sense of questioning that we have of, am I enough? Am I going to be okay? You know, all of those types of things. And this is something that we deal with even in our spiritual lives. Our spiritual lives, we always have this sense of, am I enough? Am I okay? Am I doing enough? What do I need to do? How do I keep myself pure? All of those types of things. And what I want to do today is I want to share with you a story in the book of Mark that really talks about what it means to be okay and what it means to be picked by Jesus, and how Jesus picks people that you wouldn't really expect. Okay, so we're going to go to Mark chapter 2, and this is what Mark chapter 2 says. Starting at verse 13, it says, "And he went out again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, 'Follow me.' And he rose and he followed him. And as he reclined at table in his house, many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And the scribes and the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, said to his disciples, 'Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?' And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, 'Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call righteous, but sinners.'" And this is such a great story where Jesus is coming along and he comes across what would have been very normal, especially in the city of Capernaum, which was it was a big city at the time. And there was a lot of fishing trade and industry and all of these things. And you had these tax collectors that would set up booths throughout the city. And as Jesus is passing by this tax collector, he looks, and the man who's there is a man by the name of Levi. We would later know him as Matthew. And he looks at Levi and he says, "Hey, come follow me." And Levi leaves everything. And then it describes Jesus as going into the man's home and is sitting at table. And it actually describes him as reclining at table. In other words, Jesus is relaxed. This isn't out of the ordinary for him. This isn't awkward for him. This isn't anything. He's having a meal with a new friend. And the Pharisees come along and they see this and they are shocked. And the reason they're shocked is because tax collectors were considered unclean. And if you spent time with a tax collector, you were considered unclean. Like, a Pharisee would never go sit with a tax collector. They would never go and have dinner. And if they did, they would make sure to really wash and just try to keep themselves pure and separate and all of this. And Jesus is in there just relaxed. And not only is he relaxed with Levi, but it says that there's other tax collectors. And it says tax collectors and sinners is what they say. And that term sinners basically means all of the people who don't live up to the standard. All the people who don't live up to what they should be, if you will, or what the Pharisees thought they should be. And so you have Jesus sitting there eating a meal with them, and these Pharisees come by and they see this and they're like, Jesus has made a huge mistake. He should know better. Why is he doing this? And Jesus responds in really the most incredible way, because he looks at the Pharisees and he looks at the people around him and he says, "I didn't come to call the righteous. I came to call sinners. It's the sick who need a doctor, not the healthy." That's such a good picture just an incredible picture where Jesus is picking people that nobody else wants to pick. And so as I look at this, there's just a couple things that come to mind. I want to give you two quick ideas around this to help you to help you see Jesus in a different light and maybe see yourself in a different light. And the first idea is this: God sees beyond your past. Okay? He sees beyond your past. Like when Jesus walked by, he saw a tax collector. And you got to know this about tax collectors, okay? They were not nice people. Like they're really bad. Here's kind of how the tax collecting worked. They weren't employed by the Romans, but what they would do is they would go and they would give a bid, and they would be like, hey, here's how much I think I can get out of the people. Here's how many taxes I think I can get out of everybody. Here's what I think I can do. And they would submit that. And then what would happen is the Romans would pick the highest bidder, obviously, because they need money. And they would take the highest bidder and they would say, okay, you go collect this and you're going to turn this money into me. And once you've turned that in, anything else that comes in is yours. And so it really created this environment where tax collectors were meant to be extorting people. Like that's what they did. They collected the taxes, but then they would try to take advantage of people, and they would try to get more so that they had even more money. The more that they could extort out of people, the more unfair that they could be, the more money they got. And so they would hire thugs to go and to collect taxes if need be. They would actually offer to give a loan. So they would say, oh, here's how much you owe me. And then if people were like, well, I can't afford that, they'd be like, oh, well, I can offer you a loan at this really high interest rate, kind of like, credit card companies or something, and then would require them to pay back with interest. And that's what these guys were doing. And so tax collectors were really seen as complete and total social outcasts. They were completely rejected by the Jewish community. They were seen as traitors. They were seen as selfish. They were actually kicked out of the synagogue, which means that they weren't allowed to go worship anymore. And many times, even their families would reject them. And even their families would say, I don't want anything to do with you. And it's this really incredible thing. I mean, these are people like Levi's not a great guy. Like, let's just say it. Like, this is who Levi is. Levi is this guy who takes advantage of people. He robs them. I mean, come on. Taxation is theft, right? Like, that same thought was there back then. And Levi is going around and he's taking the finances from people. He's extorting people. He's taking advantage of people. All of these things. And that's who Jesus picks? Like, what? There was a story I heard about this, and I thought it was really, really good. It kind of illustrates this point and what Jesus is doing here. You see, in 1464, there was this massive slab of marble that was taken out of a quarry in Tuscany, and it was incredibly expensive, and they were going to do a statue out of this marble, and they gave it to a guy by the name of Agostino. And Agostino started working on this, and he began working on it for a little while, and then after a while he quit, and he's like, I'm done, I'm not doing this. Then another man by the name of Antonio Rosolino, he came and he said, all right, I'll do the work. And he went and started looking at the piece of marble, and he basically said, this piece of marble is so bad that I can't do the work. And so he quit. Now, the chunk of marble was incredibly big, but not only was it big, it was expensive. And so they weren't quite willing to just get rid of it. So what they did is they left it there for 25 years. 25 years, this big, giant piece of rock is just sitting there. And then one day, a young man gets the job to go in there and finish the sculpture. Now, very little had been done up until this point. And so he goes in and he has 2 years to work on it. And he begins working on it tirelessly, day after day, night after night. It's actually described that he would eat very little. He would sleep with his clothes on. He had to work outside, and he couldn't even have a shelter around it because the marble was so big. And he worked and he worked and he worked. And in 1504, they unveiled this sculpture, and it was hailed as a masterpiece. And ever since then, it has been viewed as a masterpiece. The young artist's name was Michelangelo, and the sculpture was David. And people still go see that sculpture today. And it's this incredible story. The marble was in bad shape. It was not good marble, and yet Michelangelo was able to see beyond the flaws and see what it could be. In the same way, Jesus looked beyond the flaws of Levi or Matthew. He looked beyond the flaws of a tax collector. He looked beyond those flaws, and he saw Matthew. And he saw someone who would write one of the Gospels. He saw a man who would become a missionary to Ethiopia and later become a martyr. He saw more than a tax collector. He saw who Matthew was made to be. He saw what God had in store for Matthew. He saw the plan for Matthew. He saw all of these things. He saw Matthew when everybody else saw Levi. So what does that mean for you? Just as Michelangelo could see the sculpture of David in a poor quality piece of rock, and God, or in Jesus, could see David, or not David, I'm getting confused. Jesus could see Matthew when everyone else saw Levi. God sees who you've been called to be. And he doesn't care what your past is. He doesn't care how messed up it is. He doesn't care how broken it is. He doesn't care if you've made a mess of things. He doesn't care who you've hurt. He doesn't care any of those things. He sees you for who you were created to be. And no one else's opinion matters. And so it doesn't matter what you've done in the past. It doesn't matter what you've failed at. It doesn't matter the areas that you've gone this way or that. He's got a plan for you, and he knows the plan, and it is a good plan if you will trust him. But there's another group of people that we got to look at in this story, because yes, you got the tax collectors and the sinners who, again, are there, and it just kind of is what it is. They're there, but God also sees the Pharisees. Now, this term Pharisee actually means set apart. And the reason they use that name Pharisees is because they believed that they were supposed to be set apart for God. And they spent all of their time trying to figure out how to stay separate from the rest of the culture, how to stay separate from all the other things. And they really worked really hard at staying pure and staying clean and all that. And they were trying to work their way in to heaven in that way. And they did this. So they would spend all of their time examining the law and seeing what they should do or what they shouldn't do, or what was right or what was wrong, and all of these types of things. And they would create these rules to help them stay true, if you will. And the problem with this, really and truly, the problem with this is, as they're doing it, they're separating themselves from the very people that God called them to love. And, today as Christians, we always say, oh, the Pharisees were bad. The Pharisees did this and they did that and blah, blah, all that stuff. And we wouldn't agree with all of the things that the Pharisees said, but I'll be honest, there's way too many Christians who, in a practical sense, are Pharisees. They're people who, I like to call them bunker Christians, okay? And the thing about a bunker Christian is they try to separate themselves from everything that's wrong in the world. And they try to separate themselves from all of the problems. They try to separate themselves from the people who have issues. And they try to keep themselves clean. And I can't associate with those types of people. I'm reminded just offhand that there was in high school, I was on the football team and I was hanging out with this girl, and we were just out on the school grounds, and all of a sudden she pulled out a cigarette, and I'm like, ooh, no, I'm done. I can't, no. I told her, I'm like, I can't be around this. I'm on the football team. I'm a Christian. I can't do this. And so I just kind of left and walked away. And, there's a lot of times where we do that in our faith, where we sit there and we're like, oh, you participate in that. I can't be around that. Oh, I can't be a part of this. I can't do that. And we end up becoming bunker Christians, where we just try, instead of going out and making a difference, we just try to protect what we have, and we try to protect what's around us. And that oftentimes leads to this attitude of superiority and I'm better than everybody and all of these really ugly, nasty things that we've got to be so careful about. And Jesus talks about this in Luke 18, verses 10 through 14. He says, two men went into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. So same groups we're talking about. He says the Pharisee stands off to the side and he says, God, thank you that I'm not like other men. Thank you that I'm not a tax collector and unjust and all of these things. I fast twice a week. I tithe on all that I have. I do all these great things. And then the tax collector is standing far off in the corner, and the tax collector is just pounding his chest just over and over. And he says, have mercy on me, for I'm a sinner. And Jesus says this as he's telling the story. He says, I tell you, the man went to his house justified rather than the other. In other words, the tax collector was more justified in the end than the Pharisee, because the tax collector didn't rely on himself like the Pharisee did. And we've got to be really careful about being bunker Christians or Pharisees. And so, have you tried to separate yourself from the broken people in the world? Have you tried to separate yourself from the people who, in your eyes, are sinners? Have you tried to separate yourself from the immoral, the unjust, all of these things? We used to wear these bracelets that had WWJD on there. What would Jesus do? Jesus hung out with the sinners. He hung out with, as some translations say, tax collectors and prostitutes. That's who Jesus spent time with. Why? Because he came for those people. And if Jesus came for those people, he came for you. So maybe you're one that you're like, man, my past is so messed up, it's so broken. Jesus came for you. He sees beyond your brokenness. But maybe you're one of those bunker Christians and you've got this idea that I got to keep everything else out there. I got to keep my distance. I got to do this. You know what's great? Is he sees past that too. But you've got to humble yourself. And if you'll humble yourself and if you'll come before God, he'll take care of the rest. But first you have to acknowledge that even though I say I've got it together, I don't. Even though I wish and I try and all of these things, I'm still a sinner. I still need Jesus. I'm still broken. I'm still like that chunk of marble that's just kind of seen as worthless and has all these flaws and all these imperfections. And you know what's great? Jesus will become like Michelangelo and he'll chip away at all the excess stuff in your life. And in the end, you'll be a masterpiece. James 4:10 says this. It says, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you. So whether you consider yourself a tax collector and a sinner, or a bunker Christian and a Pharisee, humble yourself before the Lord. He'll take care of the rest. We'll see you guys next time.